they all have massive quantities of Chinese weapons. Now, a lot of people say, look, these are just regional wars. There is no such thing as a regional war anymore because China is fighting directly or indirectly around the world, and that means every conflict has global implications. We got to remember that in the late 1930s, there were wars, separate wars across the world, but they merged into what we now know as World War II. And at this moment, China is merging these wars. And the question is why? We need to look into two things. First of all, what does China want? And second of all, how does it intend to get it? Well, first of all, China's goals. Xi Jinping these days talks about a, quote, new form of human civilization. And by that he means that he wants to annex the world, the entire world, and the near parts of the solar system. Yeah, it sounds ludicrous, but no, I'm not exaggerating. With regard to planet Earth, Xi Jinping has been trying to impose China's imperial-era system where Chinese emperors believed that they not only had the mandate of heaven to rule what they called Tianxia, or all under heaven, but that heaven actually compelled them to do so. With regard to the heavenly bodies, since 2017, Chinese officials have been talking about the Moon and Mars as sovereign Chinese territory. Look, we now know that Xi Jinping is the most aggressive and ambitious ruler in history. The question is, how does he intend to get it? Well, first of all, he believes, as Frank has just talked about, by the way, it's always terrible talking after Frank because he takes all the good points. Xi Jinping has been saying that he can do anything and everything he wants. And we know where he got that idea. He got that idea from the book that Frank talked about. 1999, two then Chinese Air Force colonels wrote the book Unrestricted Warfare. And the thesis of that book is that China can do anything, including acts of terrorism, to take down the United States. Right now, China's at war with us, at least as China defines war. What we have to worry about, in addition to all of this, is that China is going to go to war as we define it, sometimes called kinetic war. How do we know this? Well, as Frank just talked about, we are seeing a surge of Chinese migrants come across our southern border. It's the biggest increase of any group. Now, many of these Chinese are just basically desperate. They're not even poor Chinese, they're middle class. They've given up everything because they believe that China is done and they want to come to the United States. But in addition, we are seeing sinister-looking elements. U.S. Border Patrol has been watching packs of Chinese males, groups of 5 to 15, of military age, traveling without family members, pretending not to speak English, engaging in Chinese military rituals, and they're coming into our country. Border Patrol knows that some of them have links to the Chinese military. And at the end of last month, on the website of a group called Defiant America, we started seeing videos of Chinese migrants who had been in the U.S. less than 3 weeks, who came across with no money and no identification. And what were they doing? They were taking target practice with pistols and sniper rifles. Now, if you had come into the U.S. or any country as a migrant and the only thing you had was a backpack, you'd probably be thinking that, where's my next meal? Where am I going to live? How am I going to get a job? You wouldn't be thinking of sharpening your skills to kill your neighbors unless you were coming here to kill neighbors. And as Frank mentioned, the lab in Reedley, California, it was a secret Chinese biological weapons facility discovered last March. Inside, there were at least 20 pathogens according to the official count, including the one for Ebola. Ebola. And there were almost 1,000 mice that had been genetically engineered to spread disease. You put this Chinese soldiers together with the mice, and you have the beginning of the next great pandemic in the United States. What's with this war everywhere strategy of Xi Jinping? Well, we know that he reveres Mao Zedong, and Mao, I think that Xi basically took 2 pages from Mao's Peasant Revolution playbook. First of all, Mao took over China in 1949 because he was able to, quote, encircle the cities from the countryside. I think that Xi Jinping looks at Ukraine, North Africa, the Middle East as countryside, and of course, we are the city. The second page involves the fomenting of what Mao called, quote unquote, chaos. Quote, great chaos under heaven achieves great order under heaven. Those words came from a letter that Mao Zedong wrote in 1966 to his wife Chang. And by great order under heaven, he was referring to worldwide Chinese rule. So I think that what Xi Jinping is doing is trying to destroy societies as intermediary steps to his complete control of humanity. Now, on the way to complete control of humanity, there are a couple of problems for the Chinese leader. One of them is that there is extreme distress at the top of the Chinese political system, and the Chinese economy is falling apart. Now, I think that Xi Jinping right now is seeing a closing window of opportunity to achieve goals that he believes are of historic significance, and I think that he's probably thinking about lashing out to distract the Chinese people from his glaring mistakes. Remember, this guy talks about war all the time, but he's doing more than just talking. He is engaging in the fastest military buildup since the Second World War. He's trying to sanction-proof his regime. He's stockpiling grain and other commodities. He's surveying the U.S. for nuclear weapon strikes. By the way, that's what that balloon last year was all about. And he is mobilizing China's civilians for war. In the latest report, we understand that he has been organizing militias inside China's state enterprises. Who's the enemy for Xi Jinping? Well, that's an easy one. That's us. He believes that the United States is an existential threat, and that means we will never have amicable relations with China as long as the Communist Party rules it. So, Xi Jinping now has every incentive to make his crisis our crisis. He has every incentive to merge wars into the next great conflict in history. So what do we need to do? We need to sever trade, sever investment, sever technical cooperation. We need to get the Chinese off our farm and ranch land, ladies and gentlemen. We need to close their 7 to 9 remaining police stations in the United States. We need to look for every single Chinese lab in our country, because I'm sure the one in Reedley was not the only one that China has. And most important, on November 5, we need to elect a president who is both willing and able to defend the United States of America. We, ladies and gentlemen, do not have a moment to lose. We have got to act now. God bless the United States of America.
Just 30 seconds.
I'd like next to introduce James Fennell. For 29 years, he was in the U.S. Navy as an intelligence, and including as an intelligence officer. He was Director of Intelligence and Information Office of the United States Pacific Fleet. And he is co-author of Embracing Communist China, America's Greatest Strategic Failure. Please join me in welcoming James Fennell.
Let me take a look at the cover of the book there. I'm not much of a bookseller. This is the first one. Brad and my co-author and I worked on this for the last year, and kind of a little bit what you heard here in the first couple of speakers is about a real significant problem that we're facing. So our book is really about how did we get to this problem or this situation, and what caused it. And so in our book, we talk about, and the name of the book is Embracing Communist China, America's Greatest Strategic Failure. And so the problem was that what you just heard about the situation that we're in is, how did we get here? How did we get to this point to be in such a situation where the winners of World War II and the winners of the Cold War are now in this invasion that we just heard Gordon and Frank talk about. We also had 100,000 people dying from opioid overdoses from the Chinese every year. Those are killed in action. People American citizens are dead. And then we have this, the situation in the economy. We have a situation, the wars around the world. So we got here for a reason. And the biggest reason is because our national security elites, the people in this national capital region, the ones that make the big salaries in the government, from both administrations, failed to understand what you just heard Gordon talk about, Tinjia and the Chinese Communist Party's consistent goal of taking over control of the world as in terms of political system. And so we, the experts, the people that said they were the experts, they failed to recognize that. They failed to perceive it. And then the rest of it is the rest of the government failed to then be informed on how to respond. And I spent time in the Navy, and so when I joined the Navy in 1986, we had almost 600 ships. And right now we have about 292. And of those 292, 60 are, associated with the U.S. Naval Service, U.S. naval ships, and they're, help to do resupply and things of that nature. So when it comes to those kind of ships that can actually sink other ships or launch, ordnance, it's only around 232. And China is well over 325. So these experts failed to understand the threat. We failed to prepare ourselves for what needed to be done to deter China. And instead, we got caught up in, following and getting linked up with a grand strategy that was put out by Deng Xiaoping, who was this guy that came after Mao, paramount leader of China, and he basically said, we need to recover from what Mao did in terms of destroying a lot of the Chinese people and their economy, and let's open up our economy, let's link in with the elites in America, in the business community, in Wall Street, and let's invite them into our country, and we'll steal their technology, but we'll make a lot of money. And as Brad likes to talk about, China, some 1990, the GDP, in terms of the world's GDP, was less than 1%, and now it's 20%. So how did they grow so fast and so far? Because we, the United States, Wall Street, and Silicon Valley, gave them the money. And we, each of us, every time we go to Walmart or to Target or wherever it is, we also help give them the money. We've got to stop buying stuff that's made in China. So Deng set in place a strategy to take advantage of the elites in Washington, and then our elites went along with this. And so the book records the history of different administrations. It didn't matter what party you were in. People were being, enticed to do conferences in China and to have, businesses in China. So their own greed, or there was an ideological association where people were, appreciated the ability of communists to get things done and the unity of the society that they thought that was happening there. And what it gave rise to was what we call the engagement school. And so in Washington, before President Trump came to town and his team, the way we approached China was through this idea of engagement. We started engaging with China during the Cold War with the Soviets because we thought the Chinese could help us provide, basic things like providing indications and warning for Soviet ballistic missile launches. So we actually set up intelligence collection centers in China, U.S. intelligence, to work with the Chinese to help us understand what the Soviets were going to launch, ballistic missiles. And from that, for over 40 years, we kept engaging. And every year you can get the Defense Department's annual report on China, and at the back of it, one of the appendices will talk about how many engagements the Department of Defense did. So we were constantly engaging, and our academic community, our China hands, the experts, the Mandarin speakers all told us we have to engage, because if we engage with them, they will normalize and become like the rest of the world in the international community, and it will make things better. But never once in that 40-year period did anybody seriously say, hold on a minute, we do all this engagement in the Defense Department, the Army, the Navy, the Marine Corps, the Air Force. We do it in the Commerce Department. We engage in energy. We engage in the FBI. Every facet of the U.S. government had people that were engaging with the PRC for 40 years. And no one ever stopped and said, has things gotten better? You just heard three speakers talk about how things are terribly wrong. But we continued to engage until President Trump came in, and his team, he had a lot of sharp guys and women that said, hey, we got to stop this. And so they started to basically change the approach of how we dealt with China, and they said, we're going to treat China as a strategic competitor. And that was a major shift in almost 50 years of U.S. foreign policy with China. And we started to turn the ship of state around. In the Navy arena, we were sliding down. As I said, we had almost 600 ships, and we were down to 290, 287. Trump stopped that, and he started to build us up. But now we're not. And what happened was, as the Biden administration, they came in, and as you know, in the first, 100 days, they reversed almost everything that Trump did. But one area that they didn't touch was the relationship with China. They kind of kept it going, the facade of it. So they kept the tariffs, they did some things with the CHIP Act and things of that nature. But it wasn't until last year in May when the Biden administration sent the CIA director to Beijing in a covert meeting to try to resume communications and engagement. And it was after the spy balloon. They wanted to start in January of 2023, but the spy balloon got exposed and they had to put that on ice for a few months. Then in June, the Secretary of State Blinken went, then Secretary of Treasury Yellen went, then Climate Czar Kerry went, out of government, but big China hand that bothered the engagement school. Henry Kissinger went, and then you had Secretary of Commerce Raimondo went in August or October, and then in November it was all to set up the first big meeting between Xi Jinping and Joe Biden, and you saw that in San Francisco. And what you also remember was that they had a big dinner there. It was with Silicon Valley and Wall Street types. You had over 400 billionaires and millionaires having dinner with Xi Jinping, and they gave him 2 standing ovations at that dinner. 2 standing ovations for a man who's killed 100,000 Americans for 4, 5, or 6 years in a row with fentanyl. A person that has got 1 million people in a concentration camps out in the West. A person who leads a government that devotes more of their money to building the military than anything else. And that's why in the last 2.5 years, they built those 350 ICBM silos in central and western China. Why in September of 2022, they shot a hypersonic fractional orbital bombardment system missile that went around the world 25,000 miles. No one's done that before. They did it. They're passing technology to North Korea. They're passing technology to Iran and to the Houthis. So they're the malign actor, and our national security elites failed. They didn't respond to the obvious messages because they were either financially in bed with China or they were ideologically in bed with China. You can take your pick. Sometimes they're mixed. And the consequences I've kind of mentioned. The book talks about, what happened in the military, a little bit of emphasis on the Navy because that was my specialty and what I did. We had years and years when we were going down in our size of our military, and not one general or admiral until just recently has been willing to speak out about it. And certainly none put their careers on the line to say, hey, I can't stand this. I'm not going to put up with this anymore. I'm going to speak out to the American public. That didn't happen. Nobody pulled you're on a train and there's an emergency, you pull that cord. Nobody pulled the cord. Why? And we also talk about the intelligence community and how the intelligence community failed to, we call it threat deflation in the book. They continue to always read assessments. They're always taking Well, it's really not that bad. There'll be another 10 years, another 20 years before they have that capability. And we were doing that for 30 plus years. And I saw it. I was in the community. There's other people out there that saw it as well. And they always had a rationalization and an excuse for why we didn't have to worry, which translated into meaning that on the Capitol Hill, the Congress people that write the laws that put the money into the military said, oh, if it's not really a threat for another 20 or 30 years, then we don't have to build our Navy up or our Air Force or whatever. And now we're in this position. So as Gordon said, and everyone else is going to say, we have to stand up and take our country back, and we have to do something right now to deter Xi from, I believe, launching an attack against Taiwan here in the next year. And when he does that, it's not an attack just on Taiwan, because we have the U.S. 7th Fleet, we have the 5th Air Force, the 7th Air Force, we have the Marines, just to remap, we have Army out there in big numbers as well, and they will be the first ones targeted at any Chinese invasion of Taiwan because they want to keep us away from defending Taiwan. So when people think about that, just look at what's going on in the Ukraine, all those dead people, and think about what's going on in Gaza and Israel. Do we want to see another place in Taiwan and to have a lot of those people be American sailors and Marines that are at the bottom of the ocean? We don't want that, so we have to change what we're doing. We can't keep doing the same thing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This is kind of terrifying, isn't it? Next, I would like to bring up Colonel John Mills, retired. He is also a member of the Committee on the Present Danger of China and the author most recently of The Nation Will Follow, and he will be speaking to us on C.C. Hayes' 6 Courses of Action for World War III. Please join me in welcoming Colonel John Mills.
Thank you, Karen. An honor to be here among the august body. Thank you so much. And yeah, I'm wearing, just came back from Taiwan covering the elections, courtesy of Steve Bannon and Brandon Howes, and it went well. It went well, but I'm not sure about the rest of the year here, so watch out. This is 1938. That's what's going on right now, and as the speakers have said, that's what's Ukraine. Putin offered to take the Ukraine and follow 21 under the no boundaries, no limits partnership. We got this. We'll take it in 72 hours. Why 72 hours? Because the American intelligence community kept on saying they're going to take Ukraine in 72 hours. So Desert Storm was their model, okay? If they had been able to reinforce Hostomel Airport to the left of Kyiv, history might have been different. 2 years later, here we are. But that, as China divided up the world for their subcontractors, Russia's job was to take Europe, and there's going to be more about that. But then you got Iran. Hamas, that was a year-long planning effort. That was China. So October 7th didn't come out of nowhere. And if you looked at the operations orders off of the dead Hamas terrorists, that was Iran mimicking American plans and procedures, and that's what that was all about here. But it gets even better. You got the greatest assault on merchant shipping since the Second World War going on right now. You got the Ruby Mar. I don't know if the Ruby Mar is still afloat right now. It was as of this morning, but we got 40-plus ships attacked. 3 ships are actually captured and turned, and the crews interned. I mean, what do you call this here? And we're just chewing up our ordnance. That's part of the plan. We got a perfect batting record so far. The U.S. Navy's done an incredible job hitting everything, but eventually there's going to be a leaker. It's not going to turn out well. So watch out. But now they're attacking our base camps. This is Iran, again, as a subcontractor, as a proxy, trying to push us out of the Middle East. Now we've revealed if Trump got us out of those base camps, we did our job. We got Soleimani, we got Baghdadi, we got ISIS. Actually, you got ISIS, Baghdadi, and then Soleimani. And that's the way America First military power projection will work. We'll project, we'll do our job, and then we'll return. The nanosecond you put down a footprint, it's over, and you become a forever war. What did Biden do as soon as he got in office? He reopened all these base camps. Now Tower 22 is revealed. There's essentially most of our base camps have now been revealed in the Middle East. Why didn't even have them there? There's no purpose for that other than to attrit our resources, and it was forever war. But walk back to the European sector, which is the Russians' job. Watch Kaliningrad. You're going to see probably a push toward Kaliningrad. That's sacred Russian territory that they've occupied since the end of the Second World War. But also watch these core Baltic states here. So that's what's going on here. And I apologize. I gave a handout. I didn't have enough for everybody. Budget cuts. Sorry. You got it, but I gave out a number out there, so you got them. Just watch your friend. At the bottom of page 1, also, we talked about America. Venezuela moving on Guyana. That's China. That's China. Venezuela is a Disneyland for China right now. It's a Mos Eisley spaceport of bad activity. I spent some time down in Panama with Mike Leon and Ann Vandersteel watching the Chinese and understanding. Look at the Panama Canal is draining at an absolutely exorbitant rate. Maybe there's some weather conditions. There's some cyber penetration of the canal, the new canal locks, and the loss of water is being accelerated. 18 ships a day is all they can pass. That's ridiculous. That's China. China. Base camps in Cuba. China. Not only now spy base, and when Tony Blinken got his name, he went over to China in the Groveling tour and got pantsed and swirlied and everything else there by Xi. What they announced on his flight home, guess what? Military training. Guess what? That probably means missiles back in Cuba right now. What is the U.S. government doing about it? What does the IC do? The ICE intelligence community doing about it? Nothing. Our open southern border, those are Chinese special operators. They are Chinese special operators inside. They don't have access to guns back in China, but what do they immediately go to the ranges right here in America? Also, if you're a cannabis user, I don't personally agree with that. Why do they gravitate toward the cannabis operations? Why? Those are high cash operations they can stem and use for funding. It's called walking around money for influence operations. That walking around money in these high cash operations, that's deadly, and that's on the top of fentanyl. Ladies and gentlemen, you can't serve two masters here. Cannabis is a bad idea. High cash operation, can't bank it. Why are the Chinese special operators going to the cannabis operation? So, ladies and gentlemen, this is crazy. But here on the backside, we went over some of the courses of action at the Committee on Present Danger in January. And she had basically 6 courses of action at this point in time. You do a hard invasion, that's full-throated Normandy-style invasion. You do a soft invasion. That's to peel off a couple of the forward counties of Taiwan. You got Kinmen and Matsu. I just have a Gateway article that went into that in detail. You do an envelopment. You do an envelopment where it's kind of a blockade, but right now they're essentially flying high-altitude, high-endurance drones, which can be armed regularly around Taiwan. So they could turn this into a hard blockade at any time. They want to. You could do a bypass. I've been worried about this here. Just why invade Taiwan when you can go by northern Luzon in the Philippines? Everybody in the Philippines, they're down in Manila doing karaoke or musical chairs, which, come on. And that's that. My good Filipino friends, those are the national pastimes. It's relatively undefended right now. Relatively undefended. Or go all the way down to the Solomon Islands. Or you can do nothing. I don't think that's a course of action. Or you can continue the world arson campaign. And on the bottom there, we went through a number of the courses of action. I think things have changed from the time we went through this in January. Because as I did the weighted scale here, and this was just theoretical here, the different courses of action graded on a -2 to a +2, what could possibly happen, what is the most likely course of action. If you look at the numeric, the envelop and the bypass kind of had the highest scores. But as I watched what's play out here, since I came back from Taiwan covering the elections, the soft invasion kind of now I think is starting to look more appealing. A soft invasion is when you go after Kinmen, which is only about 4,000. You got a small islet of Kinmen Minor, which is only about 4,000 feet off the shore. The Chinese could fall down and be across on Kinmen in nothing flat. You have air traffic control procedures that have just been changed after the election didn't go in Taiwan the way they wanted them. This is very bad. This is very nefarious. And they pushed the southbound route, it's M503, right up to the center line, which they say doesn't exist anymore. Okay, this is absolute coercion, and even by ICAO, International Civil Aircraft Organization, a UN adjunct that actually kind of works well, kind of. They were supposed to get Taiwan's blessing in this, but per ICAO rules. I'm going back to Taiwan in September here because we're going to talk about, as a reporter, because we're going to talk about possible Taiwan re-entry into the UN. But I'm worried about Kinmen. I'm worried about Kinmen and Matsu, and leveraging those radically changed air routes that now have two hard right turns. All you got to do is be southbound in M503, do a hard right turn as if you're going, a Chinese airliner, as if you're going to the mainland, by Kinmen or Matsu. You immediately declare an in-flight emergency, put the aircraft down on, let's say, Kinmen Airport. Kinmen only has one airport. And then out pop 200 Chinese special operators. Plus, you have a bunch of Chinese fast boats that just came across that 4,000 feet, and they're on Kinmen. I'm now thinking they're worried about that, because doing a hard invasion is hard. That's a normie style. They got to do something by April. That's when the storm season hits. And then April through October is the storm season. They got to have something by then. She has to have something by then. Now, because he doesn't want to deal with Hurricane T or Trump in November. Okay? So this is a grave concern, is a lightning raid on Kinmen. Now, it was just announced a couple of days ago. Guess what? We do have base camps on U.S. We have permanent base camps, special operators, Kinmen, Penghu, and Taiwan. So now we do have permanent military base camps on the ground in Taiwan. So.
No, I know. And I know. So sorry.
Yeah, we're done.
Marvelous.
Okay.
Do we get about the threat? I think so, yes. Thank you so much. I wish I could give everybody a ton more time, so it goes. We do what we can. That's marvelous, thank you. Next we have Reggie Littlejohn. She's the president of the Anti-Globalist Alliance and a powerful force with the Sovereignty Coalition that's been part of the push about advocating for all the defanging, defunding, and so on of the WHO. And by the way, we have a booth downstairs together with them, booth 205, downstairs in CPAC Central. Be sure to visit that. Reggie will be speaking to us on unrestricted warfare, China and the WHO's globalist coup. Please join me in welcoming Reggie Littlejohn.
Thank you so much. So, the U.S. and the world are at war, only we just don't know it. So, this book, this Unrestricted Warfare book that came out in 1999, what it's basically about is how a weaker country can take over a more powerful country without firing a shot. And what this is about how China, at that time a much weaker country in 1999, could take over the United States and the Western world without firing a shot. And there's various ways, which you would infiltrate in many different ways. Economic warfare, biological warfare, educational warfare, governmental warfare, ideological warfare. All of these are different forms of warfare where the Chinese Communist Party has infiltrated and is waging war against us with the idea of becoming the superpower in the world by the year 2049. which is the 100-year anniversary of their takeover of China. So, and they declared in 2016, the Chinese Communist Party in 2016 declared a people's war against the United States. So they know that they're at war with us, and we are being very naive to just think that we're not. We are at war right now. So I want to just give one example of this kind of unrestricted warfare, the kind that came through the World Health Organization and that is continuing through the next pandemic. You know that the World Economic Forum, one of their big talks was about disease X, which, by the way, is a hypothetical disease. There is no disease called disease X, and it's supposed to be massively more infectious than the COVID-19 was, which gives them the pretext for installing a biotech surveillance state to save the world, as they would say. Here's how they're going to do it. I'm going to delve into a little bit about the actual WHO international health regulations and the pandemic tree, so you can understand the mechanics of this. So I'm a lawyer, and I was reading these documents with a legal eye. So in the and by the way, these international health regulation amendments and the pandemic treaty are scheduled to be voted on at the World Health Assembly in May of this year, just a few months from now. So we have to raise the visibility of this issue. And actually, what I would also say is this. By forcing a vote in May, they are violating their own rule in the international health regulations. There is Article 55 says that all amendments to the international health regulations have to be made public, or at least be disclosed to the different nation states 4 months in advance. That deadline passed on January 27th. It looks to me like they're just going to be negotiating it right up to the actual World Health Assembly. And what that does is it makes it so that we don't know what they're thinking about, we don't know what they're voting on, we have no ability to comment on it, and I think that they're doing that because they know that there would be an outcry if they made it public ahead of time. So they're basically going to ambush the World Health Assembly on the spot. But I think that the way that we can combat this is by demanding that this be delayed, because delay is victory. Delay is victory. I feel like we are in basically a race with the globalists, where they are trying to snap this trap shut before people become aware that they're even in a trap. So let me tell you what this trap is, all right? So first of all, in the international health regulations, the last time they made them public, there are many, many problematic things, but one of the most problematic things is they want the ability to mandate healthcare in the case of either a pandemic or even a potential pandemic or any health concern. So it's a public health emergency of international concern, PHEIC, which I think is appropriately pronounced fake. So, when there's a fake, they are going to be able to take over, and one of the things that they want to be able to do is to tell every country, including the United States, exactly what we must do and must not do in terms of healthcare, so they will be able to say you cannot prescribe certain things that your doctor wants to prescribe, the things will be best for you, and you must prescribe other things. Like, for example, they want the power to order mask mandates, order vaccine mandates, order. That's what they want to do. Okay?
I'm a nurse, and I am not going to follow that shit.
Do not comply. Do not comply. And then if you go against it, if a doctor goes against it, then they can lose their license. So, we actually have a doctor here, Meryl Nass, that's sitting right here, who's been through this and was very heroically trying to get people the medication she knew would save their lives, and boy, is she paying for it with the medical board. Yeah. But what they did is they unleashed a lion. Because by taking her out of the practice of medicine, she's going to take them down internationally, I think. So, thank you. 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 Than So there are many other problems in the international health regulations. I want to also move on to the pandemic treaty. Now they are refusing to call this a treaty. They call it an accord. They call it an instrument. They call it a convention. They're refusing to call it a treaty because they don't want it to have to go through the U.S. Senate because they know it's going to die there. Okay, they would need a 2/3 vote. But what I'm saying to you is it is a treaty, because a treaty is just a binding agreement between two nations or between multiple nations, and the World Health Organization itself has said this is binding, this is a binding agreement. It's a treaty, it must be treated as a treaty, and we need to call it a treaty at all times. So, one of the things that is in both the international health regulations and also the pandemic treaty. And by the way, I just want to say this. The international health regulation amendments are also a treaty. They are also a treaty because they have axed out the words non-binding, and they are obligating. They want to be over the United States, over the rest of the world, telling us what to do. That is an absolute abrogation of our national sovereignty and our personal medical freedom, and I believe that the international health regulation amendments also need to pass through the Senate. Yeah. So, okay, in both of these we have surveillance. Surveillance is in both of these agreements, and so the pretext for the surveillance is we need to know right away if there's somebody who's sick, so that we can immediately call it a fake and shut everybody down, basically. So what they want to do is they want to surveillance on the basis of the one health approach. One health approach sounds very innocuous. It's like the human health is connected to animal health, is connected to plant health, is connected to the environment. That's true, right? Okay. But what they're doing is they are using that as a pretext to be able to surveil everything regarding human health, animal health, plant health, and the environment. Okay? So this is a massive surveillance. And how are they going to accomplish this surveillance? All right? They're going to accomplish it through what used to be called vaccine passports. But now I've been co-founded with Frank Gaffney of the Stop Vaccine Passports, and we managed to make that nomenclature toxic or radioactive. And so now they call it a digital ID, a neutral term. No. No. Okay. So if you go on the World Economic Forum website, you will see a chart about digital IDs, about everything that they are planning that we will need a digital ID in order to do, such as. You need it to access health care, so you will need it to have a bank account and carry on financial transactions. You'll need it to travel or for mobility, like, taking the bus. You'll need it to vote. You'll need it to pay taxes. You will need it to engage in social media. All right, so which means that if you don't have it, then you will not be able to engage in any aspect of civilized society. So we have to just say no to digital IDs. Just say no to digital IDs. And I want to say something else about these digital IDs. They are going to be amassing data on all of us into a centralized place so that we will live under a regime similar to the China social credit system. This is the China model coming to the United States and to the whole world. So in China, I'm trying to see how much time I have. Oh my goodness, my timer went off. I only have 1 minute? Oh my gosh. Okay, Okay. I have so much more to say. Come to at the booth. All right, so anyway, we don't want the China social credit system. These digital IDs are what will enable it to happen. And there's much more that I can talk about here, but I just want to talk about a few solutions. So if you feel like this is closing in on us, it is, all right? And the World Health Organization and the European Union have already launched these digital IDs internationally. And so what we need to do is not comply and we need to make our opposition known to our representatives. So if the Sovereign Coalition has an Align Act, go to sovereigncoalition.org, sovereigncoalition.org, and let them know that you want to defund the WHO. You want to, that's the solution. Defund the WHO. That's good. Yeah, and also withdraw from the WHO, and that will go straight to your representatives is incredibly effective. And I don't have time to even talk about the solutions that we've had, or the successes that we've had. But I also want to say that one person can do a lot. So, for example, Frank's still alive. But I mean, I was going to mention that I was talking to Bill Walton here, and I said, this resolution that that CPAC has taken again, that we should withdraw and defund the World Health Organization. I mean, are you responsible for that? And he said, yeah, I guess so. But that's huge. Do you understand? This could cause a sea change. Yes. Just the ripple effect of it going up. Okay, and I want to add that defund
You're still bound by the book.
No, I understand. I said defund and withdraw from, also exit, withdraw from, and yeah, right, get out of the do. Defund. Okay. And the last thing I've got to say, because I've got to go, is I'm taking this, internationally with the Anti-Globalist Alliance. Because it's not just the United States; it's the whole world. So please look up antiglobalist.net, antiglobalist.net, and we have a manifesto. It's tremendous, and we are in the process of launching that. So once we have to stand up now, we only have about 3 months till this vote comes down, and once we've ceded our sovereignty, it'll be basically impossible to get it back. So don't delay, act now. Thank you.
Outstanding, thank you. And again, I wish we had a ton more time. Next, it's my delight and honor to introduce Brad Thayer, Dr. Bradley Thayer. He's a widely publicized author, most recently of the book Embracing Communist China's co-author with James Fennell. Embracing Communist China, America's Greatest Strategic Failure. And by the way, he will be having a book signing at 4:30 to 5:30 at the CPAC store, so please join him there. And he'll be speaking to us on why the CCP is an existential threat to America. Dr. Bradley Thayer.
Thank you very much. It's a great honor to be here and to be asked by Karen to participate and to join such an illustrious panel to look at the China threat from the People's Republic of China through many different avenues, and to look at the consequences about how their tentacles have reached into international organizations, as Frank has mentioned, and Reggie as well. And so we need to understand this threat in order to defeat it and to kill it, which is what we want to do. We want victory over the People's Republic of China. We want to kill the Chinese Communist Party. And that's what we are essentially tasked to do at this time. Every generation of Americans, of course, have faced different threats, and this is the threat that falls to us at this period of time. Why is the People's Republic of China an existential threat to the United States? 2 reasons. First, their capabilities. And as Jim Fennell mentioned, and others as well on the panel, their capabilities have grown immeasurably. John Mills told you about how they now have the ability to move against Taiwan in short order. So if we look at their nuclear capabilities, they've went from a very modest nuclear arsenal to one, as Jim mentioned, which is formidable. They have new technologies to deliver nuclear weapons, which we actually lack, which is telling. Their chemical weapons capabilities are robust. That is something that the United States does not have, but China does. Their biological weapons capabilities also are significant. Not COVID, obviously that was powerful, but they continue to conduct research in biological weapons. So the threat is quite considerable in each of those areas. In the conventional realm, Jim mentioned the Navy, of course, how the Navy has grown. Their Air Force likewise. Their Army, a bit smaller but more professional as China goes through professionalization
to learn from the United States about professionalization. And we mentioned some incidents in the book where, sadly, some naval officers, U.S. naval officers, assisted the Chinese Navy with by answering their questions and assisting them, for example, with facilitating carrier operations, which is not what you want to do if you want to secure the United States, is to help your greatest adversary. Cyber capabilities, equally. Director Wray, FBI Director Wray mentioned, of course, and we've seen whether it's a crane or whether it's the fact that they've been embedded on an infrastructure for a considerable amount of time, wedded to the individuals coming across the border that Frank Gaffney mentioned, right? Again, this is a very dangerous situation. Their capabilities to conduct covert action in the United States, again, because of these individuals coming across the border, has greatly been facilitated. So their capabilities have grown exponentially. So they're a threat for those reasons. Secondly, they're a threat because they're communists. Okay, that's the fundamental point. It's the ideology of communism. You can't be a married bachelor. It's a logical impossibility. Equally, you can't be a peaceful Leninist. If you are a Leninist, you're aggressive and hyper-aggressive. So the problem that we face was born in November 1917 with the Bolshevik Revolution. And the success of that revolution, the creation of the Communist International, the Third Communist International, and its ability to export the revolution worldwide, that was the intent. After a bit of mixed signals, the Soviets got it right by backing the Chinese Communist Party, and they facilitated it through Stalin's imprint on the Chinese Communist Party. A lot of folks talk about Mao, and he certainly is a very significant leader, but it was Stalin who made the Chinese Communist Party an effective force. It was Stalin who gave them a refuge. It was Stalin who gave them the capabilities to survive in dangerous times against the Chinese Nationalist Party or against US-backed later after World War II, Chinese Nationalist Party. So when we recognize that, it was Joseph Stalin whose imprint we still feel today with this aggressive ideology, events by Xi Jinping, of course, as my colleagues have mentioned. So it's a very significant recognition that what we're dealing with, we've been wrestling with since 1917. And so we need to start thinking like communists. If we think like communists, we can understand their motivation, their intent, their determination, why they're not going to waver. You're not going to compromise with them, right? Because, as Lenin said, treaties or agreements are pie crusts, they're made to be broken. So they're willing to make an agreement tactically, but their direction nonetheless changes. We have a different face of communism in the United States. Communists recognized the revolution was not going to come to the U.S. Based on the factory floor, a revolution on the factory floor. It was going to come through, as the Frankfurt School and Antonio Gramsci recognized, through ideas. It was going to capture the ideas industry. If you capture Hollywood and you capture universities, educational systems, you can inject communist ideas over time, and it actually took short order. You can bring about a very dramatic change in a society. So the threat faces itself, of course, in a domestic context in the U.S., but also in that international context with the Chinese Communist Party. The CCP is determined to kill Americans. It's determined to force its will on the rest of the world. And many of the mentions that Reggie has discussed, and that Frank did as well, changing international institutions, changing conceptions of what international order is, or freedom, human opportunities, liberties, they're doing their utmost to bring about that change, and to do so rapidly. There was a time where we thought the WHO was here to help us. Now we recognize that the WHO is here to kill us, right, in some way, and to enslave us. And so that change is something that the CCP is driving, and it allows us to see the nature of the threat is fundamentally an ideological one, despite their prodigious capabilities. And Xi Jinping could die tomorrow, but it wouldn't change anything, right? A new leader would still have, in essence, with some modest changes, the same policy direction. So what do we need to do is Karen's group, of course, and her energy is considerable, Herculean.
and groups obviously like CPAC and you as the individuals who are aware of this problem and working to combat it, right, need to see what has to be accomplished, right? We need to recapture the spirit of 1776, right? We need to recognize that what the United States is a unique political entity in international politics. The United States was created for Americans, and Americans have rights that have to be respected, no matter what lawyers or tricks are going to be played, and they're innumerable, right? Endless. The bag of tricks is very large. To combat them. It is our freedom, it is our liberties which were given to us and that we have to sustain. And sustaining those freedoms and liberties begins with the recognition of what's happening to us. And if you begin to recognize, yes, we're trained as Americans to think in a certain way, but we also need to view the world as communists do and what their motivations are, and to begin to think like communists so that we're able to understand what their intent is and their tactics and why they're relentless. And so that's never going to end. The solution to this problem is to evict the Communist Party of China from power and to bring China back to its greatness as a Han civilization in accord with the Chinese polity, which is basically peaceful, as China has been for a lot of its history. It is the fact that you have an illegitimate government, the Chinese Communist Party, imposed by Stalin on the rest of the world, right? It's a Western force. It's a Western ideology essentially grafted onto China, again, because it was the Soviets who did it. And when we recognize that, they're completely illegitimate. There's no reason why they should be part of international society, and they should be ejected from it immediately. And we can send them the bill for COVID, right? That's a good place to start to begin to take these measures. But fundamentally, Americans will be as victorious as they were in the past against previous forms of tyranny. And so when we consider the dispositive question of this century, it's the same as the 20th century. The 20th century, there was the tension, obviously, between tyranny and freedom won, right? It was a difficult fight, and a lot of blood was spilled, but freedom won. The 21st century, we face the same question. And that question will be answered. Either the future is going to be one of tyranny, set by the CCP through their various minions and entities, or it's going to be one of liberty and freedom once again in the 21st century. Of course, there are reasons for great concern, but I am absolutely convinced with this audience, of course, and the intervening support that you bring, that question will be answered firmly and absolutely, that freedom and liberty will again define the 21st century. Thank you very much for your interest.
Thank you. And again, don't forget, he will be signing his book down, it's at the bookstore at 4:30. Next, I'm honored to introduce Brian Kennedy. He's the president of the American Strategy Group and chairman of the Committee on the Present Danger of China, and the author of a number of books, among which is Communist China's War Inside America, and he will be speaking on China's political war inside the U.S. Please welcome Brian Kennedy.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to Karen Sigemund and Frank Gaffney for organizing this. It's, as I said yesterday, I think this is going to be the most important panel at CPAC. I'd like to deal with this question of China's political war here inside the United States. Let me also associate myself with everything my colleague said. Yes, we need to think like communists, Brad. That's quite right. They take things very seriously. And conservatives tend not to at times. And I know this is the Conservative Political Action Committee, but for many years, you go to conservative functions, and everyone would believe that the inherent defects of communism would lead to the ultimate collapse of the thing itself. My own view is that in the Soviet Union, we forced it to reorganize. but that the inherent problems of it were manipulated and adjusted by the Soviet Union, now Russia. And communist China, it's not going to collapse because of its inherent difficulties of communists. These people believe this. They want to succeed. They are good at it. They're not going to collapse. I don't buy that in the least. We may force them to someday, but they're not going to collapse in and of themselves. And even if they are, it would be bad policy to think that's going to happen. People accuse me sometimes of being too pessimistic about things. I'll give you a reason why. You live in a great country, still with great people. But right now we're going through a dark, demonic time where our elites have embraced the worst ideas possible. As many of my colleagues have said, we're in a war with communist China. They declared a people's war in May of 2019. We chronicled that with the Committee on the Present Danger of China. There aren't grown-ups here in this town, however, who subscribe to the serious view I'm describing. If you were taking this seriously, you'd be doing everything in your power to make sure that we were in a better strategic position. We'd rebuild the American military. You'd make sure you had an army and a navy and an air force capable of challenging communist China. Do we have that today? Yes. You'd make sure your strategic nuclear arsenal was adequate. You would be using everything at your disposal industrially to produce a national missile defense to stop those Chinese or Russian or Iranian or North Korean ballistic missiles. We don't have that yet. We have the appearance of such things. We don't really have them. You'd close the border. You'd make sure there weren't enemies coming across to commit murder and sabotage on your homeland. That's not being done today. There's only one nation that stands between communist China and global domination. That is our country, the United States. From a purely strategic point of view, the American people and their Republican form of government must be destroyed. This is the communist Chinese view of their strategic position in the world. Xi Jinping said, quoting Mao, "There cannot be two suns in the sky. There can be one." I'm not sure how else to describe it. It seems obvious to most Americans when I and my colleagues talk to them about this. Your leaders in Washington do not understand it or want to understand it. Your great newspapers in your country, our countries, they will not tell you this. They themselves are in the pockets of the Chinese Communist Party. Nearly all of what we're experiencing today is in response to the presidency of Donald Trump. It represented, President Trump did, a return to an older way of thinking that would put the American people first and foremost. He asked, what would be good for the American heartland? How do you start new businesses? How do you create new entrepreneurs? How do you make a middle class thrive again in this country? Can you bring manufacturing back? Can you stop the theft of intellectual property by communist China? It was when President Trump and his administration said no more when it came to that theft that they declared their people's war. Within 6 months, COVID-19 was spreading throughout China and the world. 6 months after that, we were in lockdown. 6 months after that, there was the theft of a national election in this country. Which brings me to my central purpose in my talk. There's a political and information war being waged by communist China. They're doing it with a condominium of the CCP, American leftists, both progressives and communists, and a collection of transnational corporations and the global elites that run them. Their purpose is twofold: to dismantle the political and economic system of the United States and to perpetuate the Biden-Obama regime and its ongoing military and strategic submission to the Chinese Communist Party. The Chinese Communist Party spends $16 billion annually in intelligence and influence operations in this country. $16 billion. They have bought up every major law firm, lobbying firm, PR firm. They spread money with philanthropy through universities. They buy up journalists. They buy up whoever they want to because they take this seriously. They make sure that those journalists do not say a bad word about them in the press, right? Anything that gets said by people like us gets dismissed as a conspiracy theory or beyond the pale. Now, I fear that this election year is a year where you will see Chinese intelligence operating at the highest level ever. In 2024, I think we're likely to see the same thing that we saw in 2020. I think today the Communist Chinese would use the Muslim Brotherhood, Antifa, and other communist groups here in this country in 2024 to exploit whatever political crisis they can, like they did with George Floyd. They can use, the war in the Middle East, right? Protests by these radical groups in support of the Muslims in Gaza. They want to win. They will do whatever they can to win. Now, commensurate with that, with all this, will be the whole issue of voter fraud and whether or not we can have a free and fair election. Now, the whole issue of 2020 was the use of mail-in ballots that we had never done before. It used to be Republicans and Democrats both believed that with mail-in ballots you could have voter fraud. With COVID, all that went away. Because of that, in 7 swing states, there was widespread use, and in other parts of the country. But in those 7 swing states, there was widespread use of mail-in balloting. There have been some changes, but in those 7 swing states that will decide the national election, there will still be, in 2024, mail-in balloting. In my view, there is a near certainty that the Chinese intelligence will play a decisive role in the 2024 election by dealing with mail-in balloting. The thinking goes something like this, and I presented this to a variety of congressmen. We know Communist China can counterfeit $100 bills. So too North Korea. The reason, of course, is there's money to get involved, right? Counterfeit money. You can use it in all sorts of active measures here in the United States. Now, if we apply this to mail-in balloting in American elections, we simply have to ask whether the Communist Chinese would, with their vast intelligence and influence operations budget, use a small fraction of that budget to counterfeit, say, 500,000 to 1 million ballots in the 7 swing states that decide a presidential election. If they are intent in controlling the most powerful nation on earth, would they do that? We know, for instance, that the ability to counterfeit ballots is radically easier than currency. They'll have access to the same paper, the paper stock that's used in the ballots. They'll have easy access to the actual PDFs of the ballots themselves, and they'll have ready access to U.S. voting rolls. They use artificial intelligence. They'll be able to replicate any signature they want. Even those signatures, by the way, in the 7 swing states are not continually used or used effectively. Given that they have the capacity financially, the interest strategically, and the desire politically to see a soft on China president, whether it's this election or in a future election, it would be a small investment on their part to engage in such measures. For all the discussion of TikTok and its corruption of the American voter, I think that's all quite real. Why would the Communist Chinese not go the extra mile and guarantee victory the way I've just described? And to frame it differently, what would we do as a country if we knew with absolute certitude that communist China was going to print up my theoretical 500,000 to 1 million ballots per swing state, they print up the ballots of low propensity voters, people who don't vote anyway, so when the active voter goes to the ballot box, they're not going to be affected. You get the person who never votes, and you vote them. It should be of great concern that nowhere in the calculations of how to secure a U.S. national election has a subject of communist China and their ability to interfere in the election in this way been raised. Communist China has every interest in deciding this election in their favor. If we had an adequate counterintelligence capability in this country, or if we eliminated mail-in balloting, it would not be an issue. Unfortunately, it is. If there is a single takeaway from what I have to say, it is that we have not secured our upcoming election. Our election system is built for honest people. It was not built to stop the communist Chinese or any nation state with the capacity and interest in deciding an American presidential election. This must be fixed immediately. I can think of no issue that is of a higher priority right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Done. Next, it's a delight to bring up my great friend, Steve Coughlin. He is the founder and CEO of Unconstrained Analytics, and he will be speaking to us about the dialectical aircraft and the narrative arc. Please welcome Steve Coughlin.
You know, I understand it's 3:30 afternoon and everybody's kind of going to use this as a time to take a bathroom break before the star of the show comes. And you know, I'm going to talk about a visualization. You know, we have our little graphics here, and they're going to be available later for people to look at. I'll just kind of point out to it from time to time here. But what I wanted to kind of start off this discussion with is, do you ever notice how much easier it is to talk about the events of the last couple of years if you just admit it was a revolution in 2020?
Yeah.
And that the revolution succeeded? And that when you hear, for example, Democrats say we need to save our democracy, the true meaning of the word democracy maps exactly with the Marxist use of the language. And in fact, the American use of the language has always been wrong. And now it's being used to cover up the fact. The use to the word to save our democracy means to save the revolution. Ever thought about it that way? So, can you think about correcting your Republican friends when they use the word democracy? Because it's no longer a harmless mistake. It is an active measure right now. Okay, and it's very important because as I have one little discussion point I'll have here, Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution of the United States of America says, the United States will ensure a Republican form of government. Now, I'm going to go classical on you. Okay? Plato in his Republic said that among the better forms of government was a republic. But a debased form of government is a corrupted oligarchy leading to democracy. If you go take a look at the language, the actual Greek language, it's the language of revolution. It's almost always neutrally translated to English, so you know there's tumult. But then Aristotle went even further, and he basically said a republic is the best form of government, and a debased form of that is a democracy. So I'm only laying this groundwork down because if you want to defend the West, you better start taking account of when our people on our side use language that was set in stone 2,400 years ago. Because that's what the Marxists say it means. Well, we've had many democracies. Actually, I'll give you the names of the democracies in the last 100 years. East Germany, the Democratic Republic of Germany, the People's Democratic Republic of North Korea. If you understand people is a replacement for democracy, the People's Republic of China. The United States did not establish any democracies in Western Europe after World War II. The United States, the Federalists went out of their way to write a constitution to keep a democracy from ever happening. I get that it's an accidental use of the word that was harmless. It's not harmless anymore because it's masking what I will introduce as a concept called initiate language, a word that means one thing to the people who knows what it means, and it's kind of a weird use of the word or an off-use source for everybody else. You want a really good example? Peaceful protest. Okay. But you laugh because you are supposed to laugh. But the people who understood those were orders, and they executed on command, on time. That wasn't just a laugh. So I'm not joking. I'm not trying to be too heavy about, they're laughing. That's not the proper response. I get it. What I want to kind of follow up on is say, this is as serious as whether we survive. Okay? It really is. So I'm going through my notes here. Back in the day, we were asked to write something about the left. And first of all, we lost funding for it in 2018 because we said we're going to use the word Marxists and communist. And so we said, we're going to write it anyhow. It's re-remembering and misremembered left. And I promise you, if you read the first part of it, it's a headache. And if you read the second half of it, it's another headache. It is just hard because it introduces the concept of the dialectic. Why is that important? Because shortly after we wrote Re-Remembering and Misremembered Left, we put out something the year before the election called Warning on Racism. And we said that Marxists were going to use the upcoming presidential election to overthrow and delegitimize the electoral process in the United States. And they did it exactly the way we said. Now, I have something that came out about a week after the Floyd incident, but I could just tell you, people, including people in law enforcement agencies, 2 weeks before Floyd, had what we have on our web pages called Requiem for Minnesota. Requiem for Minnesota was something that was warning that when they locked down, when they had an impeachment of the President of the United States and the Republicans agreed to it, they knew that they could get away with show trials. I'm actually speaking to one of my graphics that you're not going to see. From that point, they ordered the lockdown, so everybody was literally put in their homes as the left deployed around the world, and they were waiting for something to churn up. If it was going to start in Europe, it would be May 1st. If it was going to start in the United States, it circles around Labor Day, Memorial Day weekend. So I wrote Warning for Racism and said why. Requiem for Minnesota, excuse me. Why it's going to start in Minnesota. And it started exactly on time. So it's important to understand that when they start laying markers down, like they are right now, they're laying markers down and they'll drag a train through something, and if they have to invent something, they will do it. It's so important to understand that there's no doubt about the fact that Floyd died of a drug overdose. And no matter what you think about the police officers in Minneapolis, it was impossible to try them for second and third degree murder because he was a dead man walking. And there was nothing in the autopsy that revealed any mishandling of the police. And everything on multiple axes showed that. So from the show trial of Trump, they used to get way of show trials, period. And are we in that world right now? So I think someone brought up the fact about the shots. I just want to point something out. When we talk about revolutionary periods, if you remember, before Fauci said you should wear a mask, he categorically said you don't need one. Did you remember that?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I want you to not think about it your way. I want you to think about it from a revolutionary point of view. A revolutionary point of view would be, this is our showing that we can make arbitrary decisions and impose them on you. Okay? And we will use a extra-legal mass line enforcement mechanism to do it. So it is true. All the reasons you have for why you shouldn't have had to wear a mask. But what's on a higher truth is the fact that what they were executing was the imposition of arbitrary power arbitrarily. And you did it. So it's with that I kind of sometimes come out of get in the wrong lane with some people. There's a sense in which the loudest voice you never heard in 2020 and to this day aren't the dogs that barked. It's the dogs that didn't bark. every person you elected to stop this. And because we're going to talk about the dialectic, the airplane, it's important to understand that for you, the most important thing that happened in 2020 is that you had close to a majority, and majority in certain areas, people you elected, that if they barked, this could have been stopped. And they didn't bark at all. And I kind of suggesting that until you account for that, there's nowhere to go. So what I'll say here leading into some of these graphics is, first of all, dialectics seek as their objective, the destruction of the object. Let me make this simple. If you're a dialectical Christian, you're a Christian who seeks to destroy Christianity. If you're a dialectical American, you're adopting to the way that negates being American, and destroys being American. So the dialectical, anything that's dialectical, you could say bad. Fair enough? Okay, because it seeks destruction. I'm going to avoid using the word negation. But the actual word is negation. But I want to throw some other words in there and then kind of give you some context. When you bundle a whole series of these narrative attacks, dialectical attacks together, those attacks in bundle are called intersectional attacks, from which you get the word intersectionality. Fair enough? Yeah. If those intersectional lines of attack destroy what they want to destroy, then from chapter 11 of Mao's book, The Mass Line, you are, well, it's usually translated as awoken, you are woke. And what does it mean to be woke? You have been denied your identity as a woman if you're a woman, a man if you're a man, a Irish American if you're Irish American, an American if you're American. So when you're awoken, you have been stripped of your identity in detail. And that is the objective of Marxism. And I think that's important because I know a couple of people here started talking about, how much time?
A little more than 1 minute.
Oh my gosh. And we're not even getting to the slides. But does this make sense? Because I kind of want to give you this theme of what I'm talking about because, there's only so much you could do with these little pictures, right? But what I want to do is give you the theme of these pictures, and that is that in unrestricted warfare, the Chinese cardinals told you flat out, we're going to engage in a form of warfare that American leadership does not understand, will not ever get, and will not come into. 20 years later, this is what it looks like. And I want to tell you what it is. It's dialectical warfare. So if I could give you a quote, I'll give you a quote from Lenin. Dialectics is the theory of knowledge. Dialectics is the theory of knowledge of Hegel and Marx. It is not an aspect of Marxism. It is the essence. So what I like to tell people is, if you are fighting against Marxism and you don't account for the dialectic, you are a part of their narrative, and you're generating their victory. It is more important to know the dialectic of Hegel and move it in to Marx than it is to know everything about Marxism and not be able to negotiate the dialectic. And what this presentation was going to really do, but I think we hit the point, didn't we? Yeah. Okay, is that the way the Chinese colonial strategy operates, if they have their way, you may never talk to someone who is an agent of China directly. You're just going to get stuck into narratives that guarantee your destruction by virtue of responding to their discussion. Thank you.
And for our last panel speaker, please welcome Bill Walton.
I didn't know I was going to be on this panel until yesterday, and I want to thank Frank Gaffney and Reggie actually for getting me really deeply involved in this. My background, I'm now vice chairman at CPAC, but my background's Wall Street, and I'm an investor, private equity investor. And when we talk about the enemy, and we talk about we, when we talk about the elites, I'm afraid I've been part of the problem, because, when we talk about we're talking about Wall Street, we're talking about multinationals, we're talking about
the university research departments have been captured by the Chinese. We're talking about the politicians. Where's Mitch McConnell? Who've been captured by the Chinese. And I hope that was in agreement. They're on our side. Okay, so we're... And Frank finds me a little annoying. I do his radio show his TV show every Monday, and I'm always bringing back these realities. And we need to do something about China. But when we talk about we got to be careful we get all the players on our team. And the problem we have is American corporations and Wall Street have probably got at the very least $2 trillion invested in China now. Not just in the public company that we've been investing in, what Prada Robinson talked about, but direct investment, private equity, venture capital, the worlds I've been involved in. And many of these venture capital investments have been in technologies and companies that are aiding and abetting the Chinese war machine. And it's very difficult for the people in that world to realize that the things have changed. When I said I'm part of the problem, I've been in the private equity business for a long time. I owned a company called Silvestri back in the mid-'80s. It was a wonderful company. I hope maybe someone heard of it. It made Christmas ornaments, beautiful. They're all designed and very pretty. They were all made in China. And I was going on one of my scheduled trips, and it was called off because there was this thing going on in Beijing called Tiananmen Square. Well, the trip was rescheduled, but my point is that those of us in the business world at that time thought that was some little thing over here that wouldn't affect us, and the Chinese had just disciplined some of their own. We didn't realize at the time, and many people in my world still don't, that they're coming for us. And they went for them then, and they're coming for us now. But it's, if I had a short answer of what to do, it'd be one single answer, it'd be elect Donald Trump, 2024.
Yeah.
Because he had people in the administration understands that Bob Lighthouse, who's a friend of mine, is U.S. Trade Representative. Bob will tell you exactly every single company in China is controlled directly or indirectly by the Chinese Communist Party. And when all of our business people and investment firms went over to China, they were naive. And the Chinese had a way to court people, make them feel part of it. Steve Schwarzman, worth $40 billion, runs the Blackstone, not BlackRock, but Blackstone private equity firm. He has something called the Schwarzman Scholars in Beijing. We wanted to make it like the Rhodes Scholars. And he has $200 or $300 or $400 million of his own money in a university in Beijing. These guys are not going to unwind their investment very easily. And see, I'm reverting to some of the people I know. Jamie Dimon, we know Jamie, JP Morgan. Jamie's kind of cute because he tends to play it both ways when you hear him talk, but he'll say bluntly, oh, look, I'm a patriot. But I need to get signals from Washington that you don't want us in China. Blackstone's in China, JP Morgan's in China, Bank of America's in China, and you name it. Everybody wants to be in there because we spend like $40, $50 trillion as they think of investable assets. If we can, that may be worldwide. I'll pick a different number for China, but we've got to say to these companies, the rules have changed, guys. We've got a real enemy. You got to rethink about redeploying capital. The spectacle in San Francisco was mentioned here when we had all the CEOs that were the same president who stand up and applaud, and everybody said how disgusting it was. Well, it was, but my take's a little different. The men in that room, and they're largely men, were all terrified that Xi was going to somehow damage their investments in China. And so it wasn't really adoration as much as it was just bowing down to their financial master. I've been told that we've got Steve Bannon standing in the hallway.
Yes.
And I know Steve. I think I'm more interesting than Steve, but Steve's the god. So we're gonna give it up. But there's just one other thing. This thing about ideology. I did the Treasury Department reports I oversaw all the financial agencies for Trump's transition in 2016. Okay, I've got to talk fast. There's demand. And I also wrote the Treasury plan for Heritage 2024.
If you go on the website of the U.S. Treasury, Janet Yellen's website, and look at her strategic plan, what's the number one goal for the Chinese for our Treasury?
Climate change.
Number 2 is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And you'll search in vain for a strong dollar, robust American investment climate, that sort of thing. It isn't that. All right, I'll be right there. So we need to understand that our government, this Biden government, and it's also true with the World Health Forum, the Biden administration is driving that negotiation. This is not just China, it's us. And so if we're going to do something about it, we've got to recognize we've got an enemy, not just China, an enemy within. And that's the only way I think we can deal with the problem and attack it and solve it. So, Steve, it's all yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Stephen K. Bannon.
Wow, this week.
One of the most important things you can see when you deal in this topic with these people, you're not going to be doing any intellectual slumming, right? No. This is top drawer. This crowd right here, not just fighters. I mean, understand the problem or are not afraid of talking to you about it. We have to face a very unpleasant fact. People that have benefited most from the fetish of the post-war international rules-based order, the ones that benefit the most, the elites in our country, for the first time in American history, in fact, the only time in American history, have betrayed this country. They're traitors. Every one of the 400 that were in San Francisco. And what we say yesterday, not one standing ovation, but 2 standing ovations. To the murderous dictatorship of Xi and that gang of criminals in Beijing, the elites in our country. How did the post-war international rules-based order not just screw the world, but screwed the American working man and woman? Twice we betrayed our number one allies in the greatest conflict in human history, the Second World War. In the last years of the conflict, we knowingly oversupplied Joseph Stalin. Oversupplied. And there was a big fight inside the government about doing this. Why did that happen? Because the State Department in the Roosevelt administration was infiltrated by Russian, Soviet Bolsheviks. And we oversupplied them. Why? So they keep taking iron grip, not just on the Russian people, who would lose 65 million Russians in World War II, but also Eastern Europe. And at the time, even Germany. At Yalta and Potsdam, think about it for a second. We hit D-Day, and everybody's D-Day, and it's great, heroic, unbelievable. The British, the Canadians, and the Americans. Then Patton comes and breaks us out of the hedgerows to Paris, which I think we were in Paris on August 15th. Then Market Garden, no matter how bad that was handled, we still got close to the Rhine. And we never went to Berlin, ever. Why? We were ordered to stop. Field Marshal Montgomery ordered to stop. Patton ordered to stop, to let the Red Army take Berlin. In China, after Liu Beijing loses 35 million people fighting the Imperial Japanese Army and really took the brunt of the best units, just like the Russians did with the Wehrmacht, took the best units and bled them out so that we didn't have more casualties in the Pacific as we came across.
What did we do? In 1949, we gave the country to the communists. The communists who had gone out of their way not to fight the Imperial Japanese during the war, but to fight the Kuomintang. And these weren't unconscious decisions. These were conscious decisions that were made by our State Department, our Defense Department, General Marshall, and all the hierarchy. And he says to go, how did that happen? Because we sold out the people that actually fought with us and died with us. There's another brutal fact. NATO. None of the elites of Europe, except for a brave handful, fought in World War II on our side. In Scandinavia, the elites sold us out. Ireland, my country, sold us out. Spain, Italy, all of it sold us out. Only a handful of people. Poland, a handful of people in Eastern Europe, the resistance fighters in France and other places who were mainly communist, fought on our side and died on our side. The rest of it was performative. And now it's NATO. All this talk about how many Russians we're killing. Last time I looked, the American people are not at war with the Russian people. And 50 years later, in 1989, the Lao Beijing rise up. We have Deng Xiaoping and these guys pinned to the wall. And the moment the goddess of liberty, the goddess of democracy, is in Tiananmen Square, they drop the hammer. And what do? We back off, and we send General Scowcroft, the Bush 41 sent Scowcroft and those to cut a deal to keep the Chinese Communist Party in power that we put in power 50 years before. You know why? We thought they'd be a more reliable business partner. 6 months later, the Berlin Wall falls. And after total chaos and the essential stealing of assets from the Russian people by predators in the West, the KGB comes back. And so here we are today. And since Tiananmen Square, the American people, the Chinese people, and the people of the world have been sold out by a combination of Wall Street, big corporate interests, Silicon Valley, Hollywood, you name them all. And where everybody else, oh, these people are terrible, we are looking at a more murderous dictatorship than the Nazis at the top of their game. The forced abortions alone was at 450 million forced abortions. 80% are little Chinese girls. I don't want to hear feminists talk about this crap. 450 million forced abortions. 80% are little Chinese girls. And think of the psychological damage on the mothers. Because when the CCP says you're going to abort, you're going to abort. This is a murderous dictatorship. And look at these folks today. People are banned. The books are not printed. The articles are not written. People want to look the other way. You know why they want to look the other way? They're making a lot of money. Henry Kissinger and Graham Allison, the Thucydides trap, we're the declining power, they're the rising power. They ran this scam in the 70s. Gaffney and these guys know. When I was a young naval officer, you take the Naval War College course, it's the Peloponnesian War. I said, hey, I love history. Why am I taking this? Oh, it's Athens versus Sparta. This is Kissinger's theory. We're the declining power. They're the rising power. They got a stronger economy, a command economy, greater military. I go, what? I'm some grundoon on a ship in the Pacific. I go, what? When President Reagan came to power, the first thing he did is have Bill Casey and the guys at the CIA, hey, maybe we do another analysis of how can the Bolsheviks be a stronger economy in the United States? I understand we got the Arab bull embargo, stagflation, all of it. Volker's going to help me clean it up. How do you do that? He did a study. Oops. We made a mistake. Oops. Oh, it seems like 20 years ago we made some assumptions. We just extrapolated off it. Those numbers are kind of wrong. Well, how wrong? Reagan asked. Oh, the economy's only like 1/6 as big as we thought. They were an ascended power. They were a decaying, rotting power. And remember, the Russian people hated them. Just like in Eastern Europe. We talk about the captive nation. Remember, we used to all do the captive nations, right? The captive in Eastern Europe, the one captive nation we really never talked about is Russia. Russia. And today, they're trying to do the same thing. They're trying to drive us into war. Look at all these guys in MSNBC. Well, we're killing 10 Russians every Ukrainian. Well, first off, we've killed 500,000 Ukrainians. Let me say it differently. The elites in this country, from Stavridis to MSNBC to all these great thinkers at the Atlantic Council, all of them have murdered in cold blood 500,000 Ukrainians. Mersheimer told us exactly what was going to happen. The elites in the West, the party at Davos, the city of London, Wall Street, and the corrupt Biden regime, they're going to fight this war until the last Ukrainian dies. And right now, the mothers and fathers in Ukraine are sitting there and going, hey, hang on, you're not going to take my son. You're not going to take my son and take him to the charnel house on the eastern front of the Russian-speaking territories of Ukraine and have him die in a frozen trench like it's 1914. That's not going to happen. That's not us saying that. That's the parents saying that. If we give $60 billion to this, we're just adding to the murder and slaughter of an entire generation of Ukrainians. This is honored work, and what you guys are doing here to pack this. We have one role and function to take down the greatest existential threat that has ever faced this country, and that's to take down the Chinese Communist Party. And we don't need to fire a shot. In fact, right now, as these experts can tell you, if we start firing shots, you may have 10,000 dead American sailors at the bottom of the Straits of Taiwan in the South China Sea. So we have to be smart. You cut them off from capital, you cut them off from technology, and as Frank Gaffney says in the indictment, we out every traitor. They're not collaborationists, they're traitors. They betrayed the American people, they betrayed the United States of America, and most importantly, they betrayed Lao Beijing. They betrayed hardworking Chinese that have been our allies since Japan, since the mid-1930s. History's going to look back, and guess what? These men and women and you are on the right side of history. And the collaborationists, and quite frankly, the Wall Street and Silicon Valley scum, from Sequoia Capital to Goldman Sachs, to the Treasury Department, to the big corporations, they're all in business with them. They will be looked at as the same people that financed Hitler and financed Stalin. I want to thank you folks, and thank you for your support. Next year, Beijing.
Hello.